Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take some of the most crucial research and forgotten stories from history and, well, we translate them into the essential knowledge you need.
Today, we're going on a journey that's
Mhm.
it's both incredibly personal and, globally significant. We're going to try and push way past our modern comforts to imagine what it really meant to bring a life into the world during humanity's toughest era.
The Ice Age. We're talking 20, 30, even 40,000 years ago.
Exactly.
And it's a huge act of imagination, really, because we have to strip away everything, all the things we rely on, medicine, shelter, knowing where your next meal is coming from, and just ask, how did our ancestors even do it?
Right.
So our mission today, looking at this really compelling stack of anthropological sources, is to understand the absolute raw courage it took to be a mother during this prehistoric fight for survival. This isn't just some old story. This is the very beginning of human heroism.
And the sources we've looked at, they explore these extreme physical demands, the sheer hostility of the environment, and, frankly, the shocking mortality risks that women faced. And this was across different human species living at the same time.
So not just us, Homo sapiens, but Neanderthals, too.
Neanderthals, the Denisovans.
Yeah.
And our goal here is to really pull out the key insights about the resilience needed just to keep the human line going when, every single variable seemed designed to make them fail.
And we have to frame this right from the start. The sources put the stakes so clearly. For every single birth that happened back then, death was, and this is a quote, waiting at the door. That immediate existential fight life versus annihilation, it defines every single thing we're about to talk about.
It really does.
Yeah.
Our aim is to give you a shortcut to understanding the physical and emotional cost of your own existence.
Yeah.
This isn't just academic history. It's an explanation for the tenacity that's hardwired right into our DNA. You'll leave here today with, I hope, a profound appreciation for the ancestral debt we owe these women. Women who faced almost certain death just to make sure their baby could draw a single breath.
Okay, let's unpack that. And we have to start with the setting, the world itself, because we need to establish the enemy here. When we say Ice Age, I think most people just picture snow.
Right, lots of snow. A cartoon mammoth, maybe?
Exactly. But this environment wasn't just cold. It wasn't inconvenient. One of our sources called it a brutal, actively hostile entity. So what was it actually like out there?
It was life at the absolute limit of human endurance. The environment was the main antagonist in this story. You have to picture colossal glaciers covering huge parts of the continent.
Right.
And an atmosphere with just extreme temperature swings. The sources really emphasize that the wind wasn't just, biting. It cut like a blade.
Like physically painful.
Physically painful.
Yeah.
Debilitating. It would strip your body heat away almost instantly.
Right.
It's hard to wrap your head around that kind of systemic cold.
And it's not like a modern winter where you can just go inside. That cold was the inside. It was the fundamental condition of being alive. And the weather was unpredictable too, right? Which is a huge problem for a pregnant woman who needs stability.
The unpredictability was lethal. A blizzard wasn't just an afternoon event. It could last for days, weeks even. It could trap a small family unit, an entire tribe under snow.
And then what?
Well, then you're confined. Your
Right.
fuel runs out. Your food is whatever you have on hand. And the cold
Exactly.
just seeps into everything. The sources make this chilling point that entire tribes could just vanish every winter.
Vanish? How
They
could it?
just disappeared.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of a war or a big disease outbreak. They just failed to stay warm and fed for a few critical weeks, and that was it. Gone.
Ah. Wow. And when a mother is pregnant, her body is basically a furnace. She needs to generate heat for two. Her calorie needs must have been through the roof.
Skyrocketed. And at the same time, she's battling these four constant, interwoven existential threats that our research kept highlighting. We should probably detail this threat matrix.
Yeah, let's do it. What's the first one?
The first, and maybe the most constant anxiety, was famine. The food sources were just inconsistent, unreliable, and often terrifyingly scarce.
So hunting was a huge gamble.
A huge gamble. It was risky, took a ton of energy, and if the hunters failed, it was an immediate crisis for everyone. Foraging for plants depended on the season, and you'd get very little back for a lot of effort, especially in winter.
And a pregnant woman needs exponentially more calories.
Right, not just to survive the cold herself, but to sustain a developing fetus. But those calories were never, ever guaranteed. If the tribe went hungry for just a few days, the mother and baby were already in deep trouble.
Okay, so that's famine. What's next? The external dangers.
Predators. And we're talking about an era of megafauna. These animals did not see humans as the top of the food chain. They saw us as protein.
So mammoths, cave bears.
Terrifyingly huge cave bears, giant wolves, saber-toothed cats. These environments were teeming with massive carnivores, which meant constant vigilance, constant fear, and you had to be ready to flee or fight at any moment.
Even if you were 8 months pregnant.
It didn't matter. The decision to run or the inability to run could be fatal in an instant.
Okay, so you have hunger and predators. What's the third threat?
The third one was biological and often silent. Diseases. In a world without medicine, without any real sanitation, in crowded shelters, a simple infection became a death sentence.
A cut or a cough.
A bad cut that gets infected. A fever. Even a common cold could just overwhelm the immune system of a pregnant or nursing mother, or, critically, her newborn. Without antibiotics, the body was fighting lethal pathogens completely alone.
And the fourth risk just brings us right back to the environment itself.
It does, hypothermia. The immediate threat of freezing. This was the clock that was always ticking. If you got separated from the fire for too long, if your furs got soaked crossing a river, if you just had to travel too far in sub-zero weather, death wasn't slow, it was swift.
And for a mother recovering from childbirth or for a tiny, wet newborn?
It was a matter of minutes, not hours, minutes.
So when you put that all together, hunger, teeth, disease, and cold, it just makes the fact that anyone was born at all seem impossible.
That's the paradox, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The world was actively, systematically trying to extinguish life, yet life insisted on being born, and that required this extraordinary, relentless tenacity, especially from the mothers. They weren't just surviving, they were literally fighting the planet for the right to exist.
It's astonishing. A successful birth wasn't luck. It was a daily negotiation with death.
Every single day.
So let's get into that. When we look at what the sources say about gestation, the picture of pregnancy is it's terrifyingly different from today. There was no 9-month resting period.
No, not at all. No time off work, no prenatal care, beyond maybe some communal knowledge of what herbs might help. That's the key distinction. We have to get that in our heads.
Right.
Pregnancy today often means modifications. You rest more, you eat specific things.
Yeah.
In the Ice Age, a woman's utility to the tribe and her own role in keeping her family alive did not pause for 9 months. The physical demands were brutal and constant right up until labor.
So let's detail that. What was she doing? She was walking kilometers daily.
Daily. They were often nomadic or semi-nomadic, right? Following herds, moving with the seasons to find resources. There's no car, no wagon. This was hard, uphill, uneven terrain. Every single day. In the cold.
And rarely empty-handed, I assume?
Never. They were also carrying heavy loads, furs, tools, life-saving firewood, chunks of meat from a kill. A pregnant woman was not excused from pulling her weight, literally.
And she was still responsible for gathering food.
Constantly engaged in foraging, digging for roots under the snow, tracking small game. That means bending, lifting, digging with crude tools, all things that get exponentially harder and more dangerous as a pregnancy progresses.
And you can't forget, she probably had other children already.
Exactly. Still caring for older children, keeping them warm, teaching them how to survive, carrying them when they were tired. It wasn't just multitasking. It was life or death management for the whole family unit.
And on top of all that, she had to be ready for the predators we just talked about.
Ready to react instantly. If a wolf pack got too close, or if there was a conflict with another tribe, she had to be able to move. She had to flee.
Can you imagine a full-out sprint across frozen, uneven ground while 8 months pregnant?
The physical stress alone could trigger immediate labor.
Yeah.
Or a fatal hemorrhage. It's almost unthinkable.
And this is where the sources get really terrifying, because all that constant physical stress led to deadly internal complications, things that were completely untreatable. The threat of death was coming from inside, too.
Yes, the list of internal complications is it's profoundly bleak. First, you have spontaneous abortions triggered by extreme cold.
The body just gives up.
It prioritizes. The body's first job is to keep the mother's core temperature stable. If her resources are strained, either from not enough food or from being too cold, the body literally can't spare the energy and blood flow to support the fetus, and the pregnancy is lost.
And then the constant risk of infection.
Untreatable infections were everywhere. A urinary tract infection, a skin abscess. Anything could trigger a fatal fever or sepsis. For a mother and fetus, that was a death sentence. Her immune system was already fighting the cold, the stress, the lack of food. It couldn't handle an infection on top of that.
And even if they were eating, they were probably deficient in key nutrients.
Profound malnutrition was almost certainly the norm. Even if a mother ate enough calories to feel full, She likely wasn't getting critical micronutrients, things like folic acid, iron, vitamin D,
Which leads to all sorts of problems.
weak fetal development, complications for the mother, and things like hemorrhages from an injury or just related to the pregnancy itself were almost certainly fatal. There was no way to stop severe bleeding.
And all of this stress and strain often forced the baby to come too early.
Exactly. The cold, the exertion, the malnutrition, the infections, they all conspired to trigger premature births. And a premature baby's already tiny chance of survival in that environment just plummeted to near zero. They couldn't regulate your temperature at all.
All of this leads us to this one staggering statistic about the cost of all this. I need you to repeat the finding on female mortality.
Anthropological and demographic studies based on skeletal remains indicate that up to half of all women died before the age of 30.
Enough.
Up to half. And the sources are clear that complications from pregnancy and childbirth were a primary central cause of that devastating mortality rate.
Half. Just let that sink in. In modern terms, that means most women who reach childbearing age might only have 1 or 2 children before their own life was cut short by the very act of continuing the species.
It's a horrifyingly short window.
Mhm.
And it had to have shaped their entire society, right? This catastrophically high mortality rate among young women changes everything.
How so? What does that do to the structure of a tribe?
It places a massive, immediate premium on any surviving children. And it forces you to have incredibly complex kinship structures. If half the women are dying young, you have a lot of infants and toddlers whose mothers are gone.
So someone else had to step in.
Immediately and reliably. The children had to be absorbed and cared for by other tribe members. The survival of the group depended on it.
So this is where the grandmother or an aunt becomes absolutely essential.
Hugely important. Often it was the grandmothers or older aunts, women past their own reproductive years, but who had all the knowledge and experience who became the central caregivers. Survival wasn't just about the biological mother. It was about communal child rearing. The tribe couldn't afford to bet everything on the mother surviving, because that was a losing bet half the time.
So that collective approach was one of the deep structural advantages Homo sapiens developed.
A critical one, yes.
Okay, let's shift to sustenance. In modern life, we talk about diet for, health or longevity. In the Ice Age, the sources say a pregnant mother's diet was the single factor defining the life or death of her baby. Food was life, but it was also a deadly minefield.
It was an incredible balancing act. It wasn't just about bulk calories to fight the cold. She needed highly specific micronutrients for the fetus to develop and to keep her own weakened immune system going. And those nutrients were often locked away in things that were dangerous or really hard to get.
So let's break down the different strategies. Let's start with our own ancestors, Homo sapiens.
Okay, so Homo sapiens tended to have a very omnivorous, mixed diet. And this was a huge advantage. They ate a lot of meat from hunting, sure, but they supplemented it heavily with whatever they could gather.
Roots, nuts.
Roots, tubers, nuts, wild fruits, and critically medicinal herbs. This diversity gave them a much better shot at getting the whole spectrum of vitamins and minerals they needed to sustain a pregnancy.
Okay, now in stark contrast, you have the Neanderthals.
Their diet was highly specialized. It was based almost entirely on meat. This fits with their robust, heavy-boned physique. They were built to hunt large, powerful game animals in extreme environments.
And because of that, one specific type of calorie was completely non-negotiable for them.
Absolutely. Animal fat.
Yeah.
Fat gives you that dense, slow-burning energy you need just to keep your core body temperature stable. They needed those heavy layers of calories from bone marrow, from organs, just to function, let alone to handle the energy drain of a fetus and breastfeeding.
And what about the Denisovans? They're more mysterious, often living at high altitudes.
Yeah, their strategies seem to have been different again. Based on the limited evidence, they probably relied on what their specific environment offered. Alpine plants, insects, small animals. It suggests a really high-effort foraging strategy, adapted to rugged mountains, where you couldn't just go out and hunt a mammoth, you had to be an opportunist.
But no matter where the calories came from, every meal came with a huge risk. This nutritional minefield was always active.
Always. One of the biggest risks, especially in the long, dark winters, was scurvy, the lack of vitamin C.
From not having fresh plants.
Exactly. If your diet shifts to just stored or dried meat, the vitamin C disappears. For a pregnant woman, that's catastrophic. It impacts tissue development, massively increases the risk of hemorrhage, and it means she can't heal properly after birth.
And then there's the simple, terrifying risk of food poisoning.
The danger of intoxication from raw or improperly stored meat. Without refrigeration, meat spoils fast. Eating tainted meat would lead to violent, often fatal digestive illness, vomiting, diarrhea,
Which would lead to dehydration.
rapid critical dehydration. A body already under the stress of pregnancy just couldn't fight that off.
And this is the most counterintuitive danger, the one that really shows the knife edge they lived on. Rabbit starvation.
Fome de cuello, yes. This is what happens when you rely too heavily on very lean protein, like rabbit meat, and you don't get enough fat.
Wait, so you're saying they could be eating thousands of calories a day and still starve to death?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Your body gets overwhelmed by the nitrogen from breaking down all that lean protein. It sends your liver and kidneys into catastrophic overdrive. It causes nausea, exhaustion, and eventually death.
It's an awful paradox.
It is. The need for fat wasn't a luxury. It was a matter of metabolic survival. The Ice Age mother needed high-density fat to protect her from this exact risk and to fuel the furnace for herself and her baby.
And we haven't even mentioned parasites.
Right, from unfiltered water, from partially cooked food, worms, amoebas, gut infections were a daily risk. They could strip a pregnant mother of the few nutrients she was managing to get.
So that observation from the source material really hits home. In the Ice Age, simply eating was an act of courage.
Every single meal was a gamble. It required deep knowledge, careful preparation, and a constant fight against contamination and imbalance.
Okay, this is where we can zoom out a bit. Because motherhood wasn't this monolithic experience, was it? Different human species were facing unique biological challenges.
Absolutely. The evolutionary paths of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals created really different body plans, and that had direct contrasting impacts on pregnancy and birth. They were making two different evolutionary bets on how to survive.
Let's start with the Neanderthals. They had some distinct advantages, didn't they, based on their skeletons?
They did. Biologically, they were adapted for the cold, stocky, robust, built to conserve heat. But the most significant feature for childbirth was their wider pelvis, which implies a roomier, less complicated birth canal than ours. This suggests their births were probably less mechanically difficult, less prone to those tragic complications where the baby's head is just too big for the mother's pelvis.
So their labor might have been shorter and less risky?
That's the inference, yes. And their babies were apparently strong and robust right from birth. Maybe they were less dependent for a shorter time or just had more physical resilience against the cold. And on top of that, they lived in these small cooperative tribes.
So a strong support system.
A huge potential advantage. Communal childcare and protection would have been there immediately during that critical postpartum recovery time.
Okay, so that's the Neanderthal picture. Now let's contrast that with our ancestors, Homo sapiens. This brings us to the famous obstetric dilemma.
Right. This is the evolutionary paradox that defines us. Our path toward walking upright on two legs, which narrowed our hips, happened at the same time our brains were getting bigger and bigger.
So a narrow passage and a big head.
Precisely. The narrower pelvis meant the sapiens' birth canal was a very tight squeeze. This led to longer, significantly more difficult, and ultimately more mortal births.
Wow.
The baby's head has to twist and turn in this complex way to get through, which just increases the chance of something going wrong. Fetal distress, the cord getting tangled, or just obstructed labor that would kill them both.
So we survived the Ice Age in spite of our difficult births, not because of an advantage there.
That's the key takeaway. And to make it worse, there was our lifestyle. Sapiens were known for greater mobility, more strenuous daily routines.
Right, more walking.
Which, as we discussed, directly increased the risks of premature birth and miscarriage. All while carrying that big-brained fetus. It was a risky strategy.
But that mobility must have had an upside, right? It allowed us to find more resources.
That's the evolutionary bet. The Neanderthal might have had an easier birth, but their specialized diet made them very dependent on specific large herds of animals. When those animals started to decline,
They were in trouble.
exactly.
Yeah.
Sapiens' mobility and diverse diet meant we could adapt,
Right.
could move. So the individual birth was riskier for sapiens, but the species had a better strategy for long-term survival.
Okay, and what about the Denisovans? We don't have a lot of fossils, but we know where they lived.
Right. In these hostile, high-altitude environments, we can infer their challenges from that.
Mm-hmm.
They had a mix of sapiens and Neanderthal features, but were living in these bitterly cold mountains.
Just surviving at high altitude is hard enough.
Immensely hard. The rarefied air, where every movement takes more energy, combined with that extreme cold. Doing that while pregnant would have been a monumental task. Their experience was probably a grueling combination of all the worst parts.
And we know there were other archaic humans out there too. Homo floresiensis.
The hobbits, yes.
Yeah.
and Homo luzonensis. The common thread connecting all of them, no matter their size or where they lived, was this desperate struggle to get a child through the first year of life.
That was the universal battle.
Whether you were fighting frostbite in Siberia or tropical diseases in Southeast Asia, the goal was the same. Get the baby past that brutal first milestone. The survival of our entire genus, Homo, was just a long, long sequence of mothers winning that battle against impossible odds.
So if pregnancy was the marathon, childbirth was the final, terrifying frontier. The sources describe this moment as the point where everything was decided.
It was the single most dangerous event in a woman's life. When contractions started, everything stopped. She was moved to the safest, warmest place they had, a dry cave, a well-made hide tent, maybe a mammoth bone shelter. Protection and warmth were the first priorities.
But that safety was so relative because of the complete and total lack of medical resources. Let's really emphasize what was missing.
There were no doctors, period. There were no clean tools, no scalpels, no sutures, nothing sterile to even cut the umbilical cord. And most critically, there was no scientific knowledge of anatomy, of infection, of what to do if something went wrong.
So all they had was
Instinct, agonizing pain, desperate hope, and maybe the crude, inherited knowledge of an elder woman or a primitive midwife.
that lack of hygiene alone is just horrifying to think about. Any tear, any contact with the ground could be an instant lethal infection.
A direct factor, yes.
Let's list the specific risks. The ordeal. What was the #1 killer?
The primary killer then, and still the leading cause of death in unsupported births today, was fatal hemorrhages. Severe tearing, retained placenta. There was absolutely no way to stop a major bleed. The mother could die within minutes of a successful delivery.
Then you had the mechanical failures, which were especially brutal for Homo sapiens.
Yes, a malpositioned baby. If the baby was breech or shoulder first, there was no C-section. Labor would just continue obstructed until the baby died, and usually the mother died from exhaustion or uterine rupture. It was a no-win scenario.
And even if she survived the delivery, the silent threat was waiting.
Infections. Puerperal fever, a deadly infection of the reproductive tract after birth, was almost certainly common and always untreatable. It would kill the mother days after she thought she had survived.
And what about just the sheer length of the process?
For sapiens especially, labor could last for days. Without pain management, IV fluids, or food, the woman would simply wear down to the point of collapse. Her body would just fade.
And even after the baby is out, the crisis isn't over.
It's not at all. A retained placenta could cause massive delayed bleeding or infection. And for the baby, the umbilical cord could get tangled, cutting off its oxygen supply in those final, crucial moments.
But the sources keep coming back to that specific sapiens problem, the narrow pelvis.
It was our unique, tragic trade-off. Obstructed labor, the baby being physically unable to get out, was a recurring, inevitable tragedy. A woman might fight for days, use up all her strength, only for the delivery to fail, killing them both.
This all leads to a number, a statistic that we just have to ground ourselves in. What was the estimated mortality rate for childbirth?
Based on anthropological models of pre-industrial populations, it's estimated that 1 in 3 women could die during childbirth.
1 in 3. We have to pause on that. That means every time an Ice Age woman went into labor, she faced a 33% chance of dying on that day.
Yes.
Compared to today in the developed world where the risk is, what, 1 in 10,000? It's an unbelievable level of risk. It makes motherhood not just a natural process, but an act of supreme sacrifice.
And what do they have to fight that? Primitive care. The sources mention midwives attempting things like vigorous massages, trying to turn the baby, using herbs that might have eased pain or stimulated contractions, applying heat with warm stones, pushing on the abdomen.
But the hard truth is...
The hard truth is that against a major hemorrhage, a severe infection, or a mechanically impossible birth, it wasn't enough. The outcome was usually decided by fate and the woman's raw physical strength, not by any intervention.
So assuming the mother survives this ordeal, the moment the baby is born, the danger doesn't stop. It just shifts from an internal battle to an external one.
Immediately. The fight continues instantly. This is where the Ice Age environment becomes lethal in seconds. A newborn is wet, has almost no body fat, and its temperature regulation is non-existent.
So the cold could kill it in minutes.
Within minutes, yes. It was a terrifying race against hypothermia from the very first breath.
Which meant the mother, exhausted and traumatized, had to immediately launch into a series of survival strategies.
All at once, yes. The first and most powerful was immediate skin-to-skin contact. Her own exhausted body was the most reliable incubator they had. It was the only consistent source of warmth.
And insulation.
Quickly. They had to get the baby dry and wrap it up, swaddling the baby tightly in warm furs and skins, trapping whatever heat they could, protecting that thin skin from the biting air.
And they had to use their one piece of technology,
Look.
fire.
Right. Positioning the baby close to the fire, which required constant vigilance. Close enough to be warm, but not so close it could get burned by an ember or inhale too much smoke.
And they had to get food into the baby immediately.
Immediate breastfeeding. This wasn't just about calories. It provided internal warmth, hydration, and that first crucial dose of colostrum and antibodies to jumpstart the baby's immune system.
And they would try to use herbs on the newborn, too.
They did. Applying herbs to treat infections and fevers. It was probably crude, but it shows they understood that some plants had antiseptic properties. It was a desperate attempt to fight off illness, especially around the umbilical cord stump.
But despite all of that monumental effort, the reality was still the infant mortality crisis. The death rate was brutally high, probably over half in the first year.
It was. Hypothermia was still the biggest killer. But digestive issues were also catastrophic. Lethal diarrhea from contaminated water would cause dehydration and death very quickly.
And infections.
Umbilical infections were a huge risk. That open wound was a direct pathway for bacteria into the bloodstream. And with the general lack of immunity, newborns were susceptible to any bug that passed through the tribe.
And the predators were still out there.
The threat of attack by predators never went away. A raid on the shelter, an accident while foraging. The most vulnerable were always at risk.
So what does this all mean for the mother's daily reality?
It means the mission never, ever ended. There was no recovery period, no relaxing. Survival required continuous, unrelenting effort. Watching the fire, checking the baby, finding food for herself so she could produce milk, and physically protecting them from the lethal world outside. That commitment defined every single day of her short life.
After discussing all of this, the maternal deaths, the infant deaths, we have to confront the emotional reality of it all. The sources say Ice Age mothers buried children multiple times. This wasn't a rare tragedy, it was an expected part of life.
That's maybe the heaviest truth of this whole story. Loss was a constant, intimate companion. To be a mother, then, meant accepting that you would likely outlive some, if not many, of your children. You weren't just burying one, you were potentially burying 2, 3, 4 children in your short life.
And yet, amidst all that crushing grief, the archaeological record shows us something incredible. It shows profound, undeniable evidence of love. We know they cared for these children fiercely.
The fossil evidence from infant and child burials is just extraordinary. They weren't just discarded. These burials included precious, intricate things, deposits of flowers, small decorative bones, personal beads made of shell, and sometimes a soft fur carpet laid down for the child.
So these were rituals, acts of profound grief and reverence. What does that tell us? Spending those scarce resources on a child who has died.
It tells us that having a child survive was not common. It was considered a miracle. When survival was so uncertain and the cost was so high, every successful birth was cherished with an intensity we can barely imagine. The effort put into burying a lost child shows the depth of the attachment and the grief.
And the undeniable strength here is that despite all of it, the cold, the risk, the death women kept having children.
That is the core of their ancestral heroism. It's the foundation of everything that came after. They were not deterred by the fear. They walked pregnant for miles through that landscape. They gave birth during storms and freezing caves. They breastfed in the snow. They fought for every single breath their babies took.
This isn't just passive endurance. This is active heroism in the face of annihilation.
And if we connect that to the big picture, every single Ice Age mother is an ancestral hero. They faced the most extreme reproductive challenge in human history, and they won just enough battles to keep our species going. Our entire existence is a direct descent from their courage. Without them, we would have just disappeared.
This has been a really challenging but absolutely essential deep dive. The central theme is so clear. Motherhood in the Ice Age wasn't just a chapter in history. It wasn't a footnote. It was the absolute heart of human survival. It was the engine.
And that is the ultimate so what for you, the listener. When you think about your own life, the safety, the comfort, your own family, just remember that you exist because thousands of years ago, a woman exhausted, cold, hungry, and terrified endured all of this. She decided that the pain and the 1 in 3 chance of dying was a fight worth having, She fought until her last second for her baby to survive.
The history of humanity is, above all, the story of its mothers. That tenacity is woven right into our DNA.
We hope this exploration has given you a new perspective on human resilience. If you appreciate this kind of deep historical analysis, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Join us for the next deep dive as we keep unpacking the incredible story of what it means to be human.